The Real Juggle campaign with Madison Berkeley.
I'm Claire Coe and I'm the co-founder of Madison Berkeley. Through recruitment, Madison Berkeley works hard to change the face of real estate, and this campaign is part of that commitment. I'm also a mother of two and really passionate about our latest campaign. With me today from Madison Berkeley and joining the discussion is my wonderful colleague, Jack Heckel.
Thanks, Claire. I'm not a father, so this is all completely new to me. Most importantly, it's time to meet our brilliant contributors of today's podcast. I'll let you both introduce yourselves. If you wouldn't mind, could you tell us your job titles, the companies you work for, and since this discussion and campaign is all about parenting in real estate, how many children you have, what ages they are, and if you could talk us through a little bit of your current childcare setup. Alex, if we could start with you.
My name is Alex Keith. I am a director within SEGRO's London portfolio. I oversee effectively the eastern half of London, if you will, asset management, development, and all else activities on the portfolio. I've been at SEGRO now for just over 2 years, and I am a proud father of 2 children, a girl, a boy. The older one is coming up on 4, and the younger one is coming up on 2. So we are deep into the nursery weeds at the moment, double nursery, a lot of fun. That is my current childcare setup. My wife works, she works in fashion, and we juggle, I think would be the short summary of the situation.
And Rob, yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Rob Codling. I work at Legal & General. I'm a fund manager and I run our main pooled pension fund on the property side. So, I mean, very similar to Alex, actually. I am also a father of 2. I have a 2-year-old and I have a 3-year-old who turns 4 next weekend. So let's call it 4 and 2. And I also have a wife who is a full-time employee as well. So we're both working full-time. She also works at Legal & General, actually, so that obviously adds another dimension to it. But yeah, we are a mix of nanny, nursery, us battling on.
Welcome, Alex and Rob. We're really excited to be speaking to 2 senior males on our podcast. I'm looking forward to really hearing what you think is the perceived difference between male and female parenting as real estate professionals, as opposed to the actual real life experiences of mums and dads in our industry. Let's start the conversation by talking about paternity leave. In the UK, statutory paternity leave is 2 weeks. In Norway, fathers are given 15 weeks of paternity leave on a use it or lose it principle. It has proven very successful, and around 90% of fathers in the country make use of it. Rob, what do you think about that in relation to our country and parental leave? Could it work here and could it work in real estate?
Absolutely, it could. We work in a company that's pretty supportive, actually, on paternity. So in my own case, I was given, we get allowed up to 4 weeks. I think a lot more could be done. I think it's that flexibility that we need when you're actually returning to work. I mean, certainly in our own circumstance, you know, you get your time off, you get your paternity, that's fine. But then, of course, when you're coming back to work, you're both coming back into full-time roles. It's actually having that support and help. I mean, obviously, we are making huge advancements anyway, generally as a country. But I mean, a lot more could be done. I think there are places that are far more ahead of us.
I'd agree with what Rob said. I mean, interestingly, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law are due shortly to have a child. One of them works for a very large tech company. I won't name, but we all know they're based out of Germany, and their situation concerning that, the parental leave, is very, very different in terms of what's offered as a standard within Germany. But layered onto that is that sort of large international tech company approach where it's a bit more flexible. But I mean, personally, my first child was when I was at a much smaller company, which had a, let's say, a more traditional paternity package relative to SEGRO, which is demonstrably sort of better, certainly for my circumstances. What I would say is between the two is I found it quite hard, given having the sort of traditional short 2-week, 1 week territory paternity leave with the first child, particularly as that was around COVID. I didn't feel like I was there to support as perhaps so much as I could have been. Whereas obviously now going forwards, going to a sort of bigger company that perhaps is able to, and you know, with more staff as well, sort of really appreciates that more. It's been certainly a lot easier, and that's certainly the feedback I've had from people I manage within the team that have had children. From a father's perspective, I would add that it depends obviously on each and individual circumstances, but certainly the early stage, I sort of found myself very much in sort of bag carrying, helping territory, if we're being honest, supporting function more than anything else. But as time went on, I sort of felt if the option had been there to take a bit more on a, you know, sort of 6 months, 9 months, whatever the time frame was, that would have been really valuable, particularly at the point you're trying to bond with the child a bit more. And also just at that point as the mother is trying to come back into the workforce. So I would agree wholeheartedly with Rob's synopsis that there is more to be done, definitely as an industry, but also I think probably on a wider basis within the UK relative to other countries.
Our first child was born in COVID in 2020. So that was a very different experience to child number 2 when everyone was back at work and all the rest of it. But I think it's a really interesting point that we actually live out of town. And so, of course, we've all been there, I'm sure, when you get that call at 3 p.m. that says your child's got a temperature, you need to come back. You're looking and think, Christ, I'm an hour and a half from home. How's this all going to work? COVID has changed things massively. And actually, we're all parents, I think probably all of us then, that have had children since COVID and haven't had that experience pre-COVID. And frankly, I don't know how people managed it before COVID. I work from home a day a week. My wife works from home a couple of days a week. So that makes life a lot easier. We're trying to juggle things. But I'm trying to imagine a situation where, this old world, I guess, where it was 5 days a week in the office, 8 till 6, whatever it was, how people actually managed to do that. And I realised actually flexible working is here to stay. And actually for us with young children or children generally, that flexible working approach has really been hugely beneficial to us now. And I wonder what it would have been like pre-COVID. I don't know how people managed to cope, frankly.
And in terms of both of your businesses, because you both have fairly good paternity leave packages compared to other companies, which is fantastic. Were they implemented post-COVID or pre-COVID, Rob?
So it continues to evolve, actually. Since we've had number 2, I think recently the company has adopted another round of benefits towards, helping parents. I couldn't tell you exactly what these are now that I'm out of that. So I think it's something that is continuing evolving. I know our company is looking at it continually, which is great to see.
What about you, Alex?
It's exactly the same. We've as a business, since I've joined, that policy, just generally around family policy at large, has been adapting and changing. Probably, but I can't speak because I wasn't there before COVID, but probably as a result, partly of that, but also just general changing behaviours. And I know that there is further changes in the pipeline that should make things easier for those starting a family or potentially adding to their existing family going forward. So I think it's good that businesses like both those that Rob and I work at are doing that and are adapting as time goes on to it, because it is really important, particularly I think around the workforce. And it's kind of a thing that struck me, is that more people are having families later in the UK generally, which generally implies that that's coinciding with more the middle part of their career, just as they're sort of taking off. And in that middle part of your career, if you're having families, the key thing from an employee's perspective is knowing that the company's got your back around those policies. It's a real tool for both attracting talent at that level, but more importantly, retaining it if it's the right setup. And I've certainly found that to be the case working in a business that has recognised that we're holding on to people afterwards. We're creating the support people need really to be able to live the two lives that we do, work and family, and in the wrong order, I should add.
I think what's really interesting with that, and dare I say it, I mean, I'm in a position now with a young family, but also have quite a large team to manage. I understand how hard it is. I've been there myself, which I think I would hope that my team would say I'm supportive to them and their needs, knowing those situations at 3 p.m. when you get that call. And I think where the big changes come is that we're now getting into a role where we are managing people in our careers that perhaps that, dare I say it, that older generation where it was very much, stay at home. One of the parents stayed at home all the time. That was just the norm. A child was sick or ill or needed looking after. There was always somebody at home to do that. And perhaps they don't understand exactly how hard it is because having not gone through it themselves. But I think probably our generation coming through, and maybe that's why things are changing probably more rapidly now than perhaps they were historically, is that we are far more aware of how hard it actually is.
On that, Alex, well, I just wanted to, out of curiosity, do you think there's still a stigma attached to men taking extended parental leave? Do you think that's still a problem within the business?
I'll caveat this one slightly insofar as it's obviously hard. You speak with the voice of one company. I certainly don't speak for everyone in that regard. I think there are some businesses and cultures that are yet to adapt to it. And actually, we're talking about real estate here. I know other companies outside of real estate, that stigma still does exist to some degree, just through contacts and other people in a similar situation myself, but in different industries. I think it's changing if it does still exist. But I think, and this is one thing I had the conversation internally about, was that if we're going to put forward these policies that are going to make people's lives easier, it is incumbent on those in positions of seniority to take them and set the standard. It's all well and good sort of going, oh, well, I'm only going to take the 2 weeks because that's kind of the norm. And I feel like it's a sort of macho thing to do. That's wrong. If there is the 8 weeks, I sort of feels it requires some leadership to show, no, someone senior is taking them. Therefore, definitely other people can feel comfortable in taking them as well. So I think there's probably a transition that goes with that to some degree, if, of course, people aren't already taking extended paternity leave.
Rob, would you agree with that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I must say, when we had our second, I actually considered taking 3 months out. My wife had just started back at Legal and General, so therefore wasn't entitled to all the sort of paternity packages. So, she was taking the time off. Well, she wasn't being paid to be off. So the longer she was off, obviously she wasn't earning. So we sort of hatched up this plan that perhaps she would go back after 8 or 9 months, and then I would take paternity for that last 3 or 4 months. That never materialized in the end. And in fact, we ended up, my wife coming straight back to work after 8 months. And then the children just went into nursery full time from that point. So there probably is a bit of a stigma attached still to taking longer periods of time out, but it is still encouraged. And I agree with Alex that it has to be led from the top. You need managerial people to be saying, right, I'm taking 3 months out to look after my children. And then it becomes the norm, doesn't it? It takes away some of the stigma and the nervousness perhaps of others raising it.
I definitely know a few people that have been a bit worried about, others haven't been taking it. So should I take it? Will it affect my career personally? Will it affect my bonus as males? And there's still a little bit to go on that, I believe.
The Real Juggle campaign with Madison Berkeley.
Moving on to how you manage the juggle of children and a career. We've still got a long way to go when it comes to being flexible around family life, and childcare is not just a women's issue. The fact that senior male leaders see it as it is a problem. And I've spoken to many senior men in the industry who have been told, why can't your wife pick up a poorly child from school? Or if your wife is going back to work, surely you can afford the extra help to do pick up and drop offs. Have any of your peers experienced this stigma? And if so, how can we tackle this? And do you think being senior is looked upon differently when it comes to leaving work to care for your children? Alex?
I know people I'm currently working with within my team that have referenced their prior experiences as being sort of negative in that regard. So clearly it's still very much a thing and does exist. I've not personally been subject to it, partly because of explaining my circumstances of when we had children. It's definitely a challenge, the juggling thing and taking time. But Rob said something earlier, which is about, you sort of trusting people to do the right thing and create flexibility because you yourself have been through it. You're that much more sympathetic towards it. I've certainly got it. In fact, to give you a current live example for myself. It was mentioned at the start of this podcast about nursery and, child being ill. Well, that happened literally at the start of this week for us. So I stepped in because it transpires my wife, who works in a completely different industry, fashion, had some really important in-person meetings that she had to go to. It's not to say that mine weren't important, but in the world of flexible working, you can adapt. Those elements, I think, are the ones you sort of have to balance a bit between. You have to give a little, take a little, depending on what it is. And I think it's quite important between the two parents to have that sort of dialogue. The difficulty, I think, is if you've got a disparity between one's workplace and the other, it's always going to end up piling more pressure on the person with the better setup in order to step in than the former. So really, I think what it boils down to is not just the policies, but creating a good culture for people to feel supported, that they can go and do the childcare. And, it's not about making up time. It's about getting the job done, really. I've never been into sort of punching tickets, as it were. It's not the way we work, but we are in the business of delivering results, and everyone understands that expectation. Just so happens you can be a bit more flexible. Might mean a bit of evening work from time to time, but most people we deal with are pretty comfortable with that. So again, I think a lot of it all boils down to communication, if I'm being completely honest. I think that's the key to making it work.
Me and my wife are both full-time working parents, so we are very much 50-50, split down the middle, drop-offs, pick-ups. So the days I have to do drop-off, I don't get in till 9:15. The harder one was when you had to leave early because of, the nursery shutting at a certain time. And the fear of that massive fear if you're late to pick up, which we've all been there racing up the hill to get to pick up. But yeah, so we're very much split down the middle between the pair of us. Personally, I work in a company that's very supportive on that. I mean, I've never once had anyone think, oh, where are you heading? Why are you late? Why are you leaving earlier? Again, the flexible working allows, if you've got a 5 o'clock meeting, maybe I'll get the train back a bit earlier and then log on at home, have the call, and then go to pick up. So I think that has obviously made a huge difference. I think the other thing that our company offers is this sort of emergency childcare, and we get allocated a certain number of days. Now, the beauty of us both working in the company, of course, is that we get to double up on that between us. But that's been really helpful. In fact, we had that on Monday. Our nanny wasn't well, and we phoned up and managed to get an emergency childcare for the day. And that was great. And that was, essentially the company had paid for that. So, that's really good. Yeah, it's hard work.
Rob, touching on it again, but Do you think that real estate companies in general look at parenting responsibilities differently according to gender and react accordingly? I mean, I'm not talking about any business and specifically, but more generally in real estate, do you think that different genders mean that businesses react differently?
I suspect they probably do. So my own experience where I work is that is not the case. I have heard stories, much like Alex says, across the industry. Generally, the horror stories I've heard have probably been from smaller companies. I would say the larger company, obviously with L&G and SEGRO, with two of the larger real estate companies, you would expect them to have some of the best support for parents. The stories I've heard has been in smaller businesses.
Yeah, I think that's what Rob's just said is pretty much bang on. I think it's exceptions rather than the rule. But again, the size of the company, I think there's fundamentally just greater scrutiny, just purely by the dint of roles and types. Because lest we forget, in the real estate industry, it's not just pure property people working in it. There are lots of other areas. So, like for example, in a SEGRO or a L&G, you can have lots of people in finance. You have multiple people in HR, so on and so forth. We're competing for those jobs against other industries. You know, anyone in finance could work in. They could work in a range of different industries, and therefore that choice, knowing things that, you know, with regards to the family policies, that sort of stuff, those will be determining factors for people. Where I think prejudice in favour of one over the other occurs, I think it probably is in that sort of smaller sector where there just isn't the support, there just isn't the headcount perhaps to pick up the slack to a degree. You know, so I think it's quite common, isn't it, when businesses are overstretched in that situation, that something kind of gives and pressure comes on, and it becomes very difficult for people then trying to juggle extreme pressures of work versus the family side of stuff. Whereas I like to think that both the companies we're talking about, SEGRO and L&G, have together, you know, got the network, the framework in place to support people as and when things happen. Because, I mean, we're talking about childcare, there's a myriad of other personal related issues that occur that we'll have to navigate, right? I think it's important to know, and again, coming back to that point, that the company does have your back. It matters to a lot of people. I don't think there is anything more stressful than small children, whether that's a trip to A&E because they've fall over and gash their eyebrows, seemingly commonplace at nursery with my children, or, you know, being sick or whatever it is. You need that support to be able to react, deal with it.
Moving on to women in real estate, keeping senior women in roles. When women work, economies grow, and we need that diversity in thought throughout real estate. And it's clear from our conversation so far that having a supportive father or partner is what will help women progress in their own careers. Just moving on to childcare systems, it is the second most expensive in the world, and we're all going through those extortionate costs at the moment, and salaries just aren't increasing at the same rate. And therefore, it is falling on the women that are leaving the industry, and they're not breaking even, or in turn not seeing their children. It seems like mums have to choose between having kids or their career. How can they have both, Alex?
I had a conversation with my wife about this the other day, because as mentioned, she works in fashion, recently kind of got back into work, and I mean, she's managed to negotiate jobs. She doesn't work full time, she works 4 out of 5 days a week, but it's the classic, isn't it? You work 4 out of 5 days a week and inevitably ends up doing more than that just to make up the difference. It is a real challenge for her, because she had 2, she was out for the full year for both of them. You know, the fear was, I'm going to be put back in, you know, career wise, I'm going to be fall behind by, you know, cumulatively circa 2 years. I mean, her industry is slightly different. There are a lot of females within the fashion industry on a proportionate basis. So I suspect in that regard, it's probably less, whereas my understanding is real estate is still fairly male orientated. For that reason, I could see why there is pressure around that and the feeling that they're going to fall behind. But equally, it's one of those things that careers, you know, they don't go in an absolute straight line. They go at different speeds at different times. As a father, do you have the ability to work every single hour of the day purely on work? And I don't think you do. You know, you have a duty to your children, but also to your wife, particularly if they want a career, which they're entitled to try and support them. So it is a bit of a balance. I don't think at this particular point in time I could literally working 24/7 and not taking part in the family. I don't think my marriage or anything would survive that. You make choices, and I think therefore it comes back to that point about leadership, and it's got to be obviously a balance of time. I think Rob sort of said they split it 50-50. We're much the same. One pick up, one drop off. Certain events I just simply can't go to. I think it's very personal to each and every family. If the setup is right within a company, then that becomes demonstrably easier for the couple to manage. And I think the more that we shine a light on good practice within the industry in terms of being able to support particularly women having that career and not feeling like they have to give up, the less it's going to occur, the more we're going to retain talent. It is incredibly tough financially for so many people. And I do wonder, frankly, how many manage it. Gets easier, as I understand it, to a degree with school, depending on what route you go. But then we're into the issue of 9:30 starts, 3:30 finishes. Point me in the direction of a job that aligns with the average school hours, because I'm interested to know where that exists. There's a fundamental disconnect clearly there that needs addressing in terms of productivity, but that's quite a big topic, I think, to tackle. So I would stick with, from a real estate perspective, create the culture to enable women to want to come back into the workplace, feel supported to do what they need to do, and vice versa. Also, that men can be in a position to support.
I think it's a really interesting one. I mean, I think, as Alex says, my first thing was to go back and say, well, the new government that's come in, it's got this big, great strategy. To do that, to grow the economy, they need to get people working. And the cost of childcare, as we all know, it is extortionate. I'm in a well-paid job, and yet we still feel the pinch from childcare with the 2 children. And I don't know how a lot of the population, how they manage to make ends meet on that. And of course, then what does that cause? It means one of the parents stops working, at least for a period of time whilst their children are young before they can get into school. And then we've got this thing of so we're still in this world where it naturally falls on the female to stop the work. That generally seems to be what's happening. Now, I'd hope it's changing, and it will. I'm sure it will gather momentum. We need more men to take that time off and to allow females to continue their work, and then it will sort of gradually sort itself out. But of course, these things aren't going to change overnight. I was hoping that the young people coming through now be very much like, I'll take the time out and do it. Our nursery, one of the boys is ill. Who do they ring? They ring my wife. They don't ring me. They've got my number. So there's an element as well where everybody needs to think about the change. There's a long way to go, and a lot more could be done to actually help everybody achieve everything they want to.
It does feel like there needs to be a material adjustment to the sort of the base level of supported care to people, particularly in working roles, if indeed they are contributing towards economic productivity.
Definitely, jobs just aren't sustainable for both parents around the education system. It just doesn't add up, and I think something needs to change.
I had a thought recently about if people are going to go on extended maternity, paternity leave. It's always struck me that if you were to go off for 3-6 months, whatever it is, then rather than it creating a risk that someone's going to come and pinch your job, actually it just creates an opportunity for others in the team to step up. And that might not be one person, that might be 2 people step up to backfill your role, to get a bit of experience within management, leadership, whatever it may be. And then you come back to the workplace in your role. You probably end up in a situation where those team members have a greater appreciation of the challenges that you face. But add to that, they themselves, if they haven't already had family, will eventually down the line go through the same experience and probably be less fearful of coming back into the workplace, knowing that it's creating opportunities. Because that is often quite a lot of a challenge, certainly within a lot of businesses I've faced, is that issue of where do I go next? Where's the opportunity? Well, if people are taking time for family, it could be that is a really good solution to give people the exposure they crave towards management, to more senior roles, see whether it's right for them. Because how do you know, right, until you've tested it? And 3 to 6 months or 9 months, whatever the role, potentially also works for recruitment. So instead of having to go and replace like for like on maternity contracts, which I know my wife was looking at maternity contracts, didn't particularly care for the idea, given it's short term, there's no guarantee of a permanent role at the end of it. Well, you can end up recruiting somebody into the team on a more permanent basis to do a bit of that role, but potentially at a level below. It's an instant stretch, an instant appeal to them to want to take the role, because it's showing there will be the opportunities going forward.
Thank you so much for your time today. Yeah, big thank you for waving the flag as senior males in the industry.
Yeah, just second that. Thanks very much. Please do listen to the other interviews in this campaign series, which aim to tackle all the issues faced by parents working in real estate, and do share it with your networks.
These conversations being started is how things eventually change, and that is the aim of this campaign series. Thanks again to Alex Keith, Regional Director at SEGRO, and Rob Codling, Fund Manager at Legal & General.